Hi, folks. Chris Voss here from the ChrisVossShow.com, the ChrisVossShow.com. Hey, we're coming here with another podcast. So we want to talk about some of the things that we know about in the podcast, if you will. So let's get down to it. The thing I want to talk about today is Twitter. Twitter made its first I can't even remember saying that. Jesus, when did they start that service? Like 2004, 2005, 2006, 2007. They turned their first quarterly profit as their ad sales have risen, especially internationally, which is probably the Russians. I don't know if that's really true, but evidently they did well internationally with their ad sales that helped boost them into finally making a profit. What's interesting about that is that they didn't have any user growth, so they're still flatlined on user growth and not really growing. In fact, if anything, hopefully they're wiping out all the Russian bots, but it gave a good boost to stock and everything else. So some interesting things happened. They're still running at 330 million active users a month, which is a rise of 4% of last year, but no change in the previous quarter. Monthly active users were down 68 million from 69 million, so I guess it's a 1 million drop over the third quarter. The crackdown on fake accounts, of course, is not helping, considering they have a flat growth rate and everything else. So it's pretty interesting what's going on that way with Twitter. Now, of course, the same day, it came out that Twitter failed to remove hundreds of Russian propaganda videos that are aimed at Americans. So they didn't clean up Vine, which was still one of their properties, and they left them on there, probably knowing full well that that's what they were being used for. The other thing I want to talk about is I remember the days of Twitter when they started out, and they were like trying to get to 40 employees for as they could for some unknown godly reason. They were raising a ton of money with Fred Wilson and Union Square Partners, and for the longest time they were just trying to hold it to 40, and it just seemed to go on forever as they went through this massive growth, massive Twitter whales. If you remember the fail whale back in the day, you never see that anymore, do you? And so it's cool that they finally made a profit, and I think this is a chance for Twitter to turn over a new page. Number one, they need to get rid of these Russian bots. Number two, they need to move to a system like Facebook has, like YouTube has, like Google Plus has, of one account, one identity. I mean, if you want to have some multiple business accounts, that's fine. But you need to have a Twitter account tied to a specific identity. Look, let's talk about some of the things, and I'll get to why I think that way as well, and we'll paint the whole picture here. So I got a survey. This is kind of weird. I got a survey yesterday as well from Twitter asking me about how I felt about certain things. A large part of the survey revolved around hate crime or hate speech and how to handle it. How should Twitter handle it? How do I handle it? What's my experience seeing hate speech on Twitter? And it was kind of an interesting questionnaire survey. In fact, I wish I'd made a copy of it as I went along because I can't seem to get back into it. But what happened was, the kind of questions they had were like, if someone posts hate on Twitter, is that okay or is that bad? Or is it okay that they're voicing their opinion? But then they got into this weird kind of zone that made me go, what? But I guess it's a survey, so they're trying to flush out all the variables. But they started asking, so if a person posts hate speech, how does that affect you? Like, do you engage in arguing with them, or do you support it, or do you watch Twitter to see who responds to it on your side of knowing that's wrong and fighting against the person who's doing hate speech? Or are you watching to see because you're aligned with the hate speech? It's kind of a really interesting survey when I'm like, this is really weird. Like, the first thing that comes to my mind is hate speech should not be on Twitter or any of these platforms, okay? There should not be an allowable place for them on these major platforms. Now, let me talk about why that is. Twitter loves to be this champion, and unfortunately, it's really made their user growth level. A lot of people think it's a sewer of just hate trolls, pretty much, and ugliness, and people like to stay away from it because there's so much ugliness and hate on Twitter. Now, they've reported themselves as being the champions of free speech, and of course, you know, with the Arab Spring and different other things, they're like, well, you know, these people can't put their names on stuff, so, but this gives them a chance to put this out. Well, there's still a lot of other ways that people can get things out. In fact, nowadays, when government shuts down in some of these third world countries where the country can just turn off the internet, they actually take and use like other things like Telegraph, and there's other different apps that they're using now to get their message out, to share data, to share information, et cetera, et cetera. They don't really need Twitter. Twitter does not have to be a place for hate speech, anonymous users, et cetera, Russian bots. Twitter is a private property. It is a private property like Facebook. It is not a public property. Look, there's all sorts of people that you hear just always constantly beating the drum, and of course they're usually the ones that are kicked off of Twitter. Some of the alt-right, Breitbart folks that have been kicked off Twitter kind of come to mind. Now, look, we have a constitution in this country, and a lot of countries do believe in some form of free speech. But free speech, when the constitution makers made it, didn't go, if there's an app someday, I hereby declare that that app on that phone shall be subject to free speech. In fact, when the guys made the thing, they had no concept of computers or whatever when it came to making the Constitution. So free speech meant that you could put stuff in print with your own printer, your own press, not someone else's, unless they wanted to print it as well for you. But again, that's their private property. But free speech means you can assemble. You can go out into the air and say, I believe in this bull. You don't, and screw you, and champion me. I'm awesome. And that's what free speech is supposed to be about. People can go out. They want to protest. They want to publicly decry something. They want to strike. Whatever they want to take and do, free speech. Go out into the public atmosphere, into the air, and shout your whatever and all that good stuff. If you want to get your own printer, press, and you know, newspaper back in the day they had there, print your story, go ahead, free speech. If you want to get some other paper like the New York Times to print your story, okay, guess what though? That's private property. They can decide if they want to print your speech or not. They don't have to print your speech because that's not free speech that they have to take and be ordained to. So the same thing is Twitter and Facebook and all these other properties that have walled themselves off from this kind of anonymous hate troll rhetoric. So what I'm hoping for is that Twitter, now that they're making a profit, now they're starting to, you know, show signs that they're going to, you know, become a valid, solid, profitable company in the future. Now is it for Jack and the other board members of Twitter to take and stop all this anonymous crap, to stop all the anonymous bots, to stop all the Russian bots and everything else. It needs to become more of a private property, and it needs to become a safer ground. When I talk to most people, you talk to movie stars, rock stars, anybody who is on Twitter, they largely, you'll hear them say it all the time, well, I try and stay off Twitter. Why? There's just so much hate trolls and everything else. You know, I used to have a lot of hate trolls on YouTube. And Google Plus came out with a rule that said if you want to be on YouTube, you've got to identify yourself and get a Google Plus account that proves who you are. Wasn't that great? Kind of killed a lot of my comments and stuff, but it killed a lot of my trolls and killed a lot of hate that was going on and ugliness and people telling me I should commit suicide because my review wasn't good enough or my video wasn't good enough or I'm a fat whatever, blah, blah, blah. So Twitter, I'm hoping, will turn this page and get away from this BS that they seem to imbibe with themselves about how, well, we're about free speech and, you know, anonymous users and saving the world and blah, blah, blah. Shut the fuck up. The reason you're not growing, the reason you aren't as popular as the other services is because you've embraced these hate trolls. And what's worse is you don't even know what to do with them. Like they were asking me, they said, well, if someone does hate speech on Twitter, what should happen to them? Should they be banned? Should they be suspended? Should Twitter be responsible for identifying it, et cetera, et cetera? Look, as far as I'm concerned, there's certain things in this world that are not allowable. If I go up to somebody in a public sphere and I use hate speech against them and violence, I'm going to go to jail. Hate speech just does not have a place in our society. Now, if you want to go out in the public square and yell about how you hate certain types of people or entities or whatever the hell you want to argue about, that's fine. That's free speech. But we don't have to do it on these private properties. These private properties should be fairly safe, ethical zones where we don't have that kind of crap going on and we don't have to wonder who it is. Because half the way these trolls are getting away with their crap, throwing our elections and everything else, is because they can be anonymous. They can't be hunted down very well, and they're hard to find, and so they can hide behind this apparition of an anonymity, and they can go be as hateful and ugly as they want. So take away their masks, the way that they hide themselves, much like the KKK wearing the masks over their face because they're too chicken shit to be identified. And let's unmask them. Let's see who they are. Let's identify them. Now, to me, for years, I've always suspected, I don't know if this is true or not, that Twitter, the reason they've never cleaned house in this function is they probably lose like, I don't know, 50 million users or something. And of course, everyone will be like, oh, Twitter's dying. And then, you go to think, guess what, Twitter? You just hit a profit. So it's probably time, the perfect time to go, you know what? We're going to clean house. You guys are going to love us. We got great PR going on with this profitability thing. And we're going to clean house. We're going to do the responsible thing, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to quit taking Russian money through elections. And we're going to be a responsible world citizen company. You know, if an Arab person wants to start a new Arab Spring, or in Hong Kong want to have the Hong Kong strikes and battles they had there with China and stuff over the recent years, it seems to come about every year. You know, they've got apps like Graph and some other ones that they can use to get their word out, to talk to people. There's apps that you can use nowadays to take and communicate with reporters and have private conversations, being of anonymous things. If you remember, there was several apps that were being used by leakers in the White House when Trump first took office, and they were using the specialized apps to leak out the data and information. So they have these things out here. We don't need to have this sewer area of Twitter that's just filled with ugliness and crap, of hate and misery and everything else. If you want to have free speech, great. Go yell to the sky. I don't want to see it on Twitter. I don't want to see it on Facebook and all those other things. And so I'm hoping that Twitter will take this turn and go down this road. So once again, I think I'm also supportive of the fact that these things need to be more regulated. Newspapers and other media are highly regulated. They're regulated. They have rules and different things that they need to be pertaining to. The same needs to apply towards Twitter, Facebook, and everything else. If someone's posting political ads, that needs to have the same political ad standards that we use here in America, to say this is who's posting that ad, et cetera, et cetera. Evidently, Facebook is going to go ahead and do that. But Twitter needs to do the same thing. We need to know who's behind the mask, who's hiding, who's manipulating, who's trying to overthrow our governments, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a slippery slope. I get it. It's like, well, this is great for America, but if you're an Arab guy in the Middle East, you're trying to start the next Arab Spring or the original Arab Spring, how would that happen? Well, there's plenty of other apps for that. And there's private apps, and there's a plethora of message apps and communications with reporter apps that you can go to and everything else. I just don't think it's that big of a deal for Twitter to say everybody on Twitter needs to have an identity that we can trace, that we know who you are, what you're doing, et cetera, et cetera. And I really think that's important. So that's my view. I'm curious to know what your view is. So in the comments on this video on YouTube, please put what you think Twitter should do to clean up its mess, or if it should bother to clean up its mess. Should hate speech be allowed to be on Twitter? It's not free, public, whatever. It's not free speech. It's not a public place. It is a private property. I've had people that have, they've come to me and they've been, Chris, I got kicked off of Facebook. What'd you do? I wrote a bunch of ugly things about people. Well, you got kicked off then. Well, that's not right. They shouldn't be able to do that. No, they actually can. It's their private property. If you come onto my property, the Chris book over here, and you start saying hate speech or ugly things or whatever, I can ask you to leave. And if you won't leave, then I can either shoot you, I guess, or have a police officer walk you off my property. That's the same thing as Facebook and all those other things. These are not public property entities, unless the U.S. government, I guess, buys Twitter. Excuse me. Unless the government buys Twitter, then that might be a different thing. But there you go. In fact, maybe the bigger question here that we should all be asking is the internet public property? I don't know. So anyway, that's what I think. I really wish Twitter would clean up its act, and I think if they won't clean up their act, then it has to be legislated. A lot of these companies are companies that are international companies. So really all they care about is selling and making the bottom line, the buck, and becoming profitable. And there's a certain citizenship that they have to the world that they owe, that an ethos or ethics that they need to support. And I really believe that needs to take place. So that's my little Twitter bit. Congratulations, Twitter, for finally making a profit. Anybody who says you guys aren't going to make it in the long run, there you go. Whether or not you continue to make a profit is probably, who knows. It may be that Donald Trump is the best thing for you. That was the other thing that was interesting to me. They came out and they said, well, Donald Trump and other big leaders, even though they show racist tendencies, they put horrible images up, especially like attacks on reporters, et cetera, that endanger their lives and encourage people of bad minds to do bad things. And so they said, we're going to keep those people on. And I'm like, why would you keep those people on? If I owned Twitter, if I was Jack, I'd kick Donald Trump off for some of the things he said. I would. I'd be like, I'm sorry. I don't care. Maybe they're afraid of him. Maybe they're afraid of being regulated if they kick him off, or whatever. The one thing that's interesting about the Trump situation on Twitter, and he probably has done more for Twitter and Twitter's profitability than anybody, because the Russians definitely love him and are supporting him. And every time you see some new push that they're doing, the Russians are clearly behind it and buying ads on Twitter and promoting on Twitter, et cetera, et cetera. So he's probably their best he's probably driving the system at this point and keeping them profitable and everything else. But it's interesting to me that with, some people say, well, Donald Trump, really exposes what a horrible person he is on Twitter. Maybe that's a good thing. We might look back on this whole thing, and some of it may come up as evidence in the Mueller investigation. But maybe it's better that we know how fucking crazy he is and what a incredible liar he is, habitual liar. I mean, maybe it's better. I mean, what if we had a president he's a lot like Nixon, and no one really knew how awful a person Nixon was, how he spoke, and everything else, because all you ever saw was, Nixon come out looking eloquent, talking as eloquent as he could. You didn't hear the garbage pail, Seward mouth Nixon until later. You heard the tapes, and America was pretty shocked when they heard their president talking that way, which is kind of funny because we're all human beings. We all talk a certain way, but, he doesn't hold back and lets it all hang out. So it's probably better that we You know, he does all that and says all that. So we can look at him and go, okay, so we know who you are. You're the racist, misogynist, asshole who's just in it for himself. Thanks for making sure that we were clear on the subject by tweeting some more so that we weren't disillusioned in any way. So there you go. So anyway, let me know what you think about Twitter and what it should do. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts, or if you want to come on the show as a guest and tell me what you think about Twitter and everything else. So congratulations, Twitter, for turning a profit. Now, if we can just get you to regulate some of those Russian bots and also take away anonymity, take away anonymity where everyone has to come forward with their profile, who they are, use a picture of who they are, et cetera, et cetera. Kick them off the system. And I can tell you, Twitter, if you change your ways where you can get rid of this hate that's on your system, it's going to be awesome. And that was really the interesting part of that survey. They were like, so if someone puts hate speech on Twitter, should they be banned or blocked, or what should happen to them? Like, they shouldn't have any. It just should not be on that private property. I don't go to Twitter to see hate speech. Now, I'm sure there's some people that are, but you know what? They can go make their own freaking private property, their own printing press for that. And there actually is a website called, I think it's Gab AI, I think it is, that actually has all the Trump supporters on it. And it has a lot of the people who are on the alt-right who are kicked out of it. So there you go. You can have your own little trash tour site. You can sit around and shit on people and human beings based upon their color, race, and religion, and whatever the hell else you want to do because you're a hateful, angry, mean person with a small penis. So have fun with that. Anyway, guys, thanks for tuning in to the Chris Voss Show. We certainly appreciate you guys. Be sure to go to iTunes, Google Play. You can download it, the app, subscribe. You can go to youtube.com/Chris Voss there, and patreon.com/Chris Voss to support the show. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. We certainly appreciate you, and I'll see you next time.